Pregnant wife abandoned at the altar by Millionaire. 15 years later, she finds him begging on the street and is shocked to discover he was sleeping at the door of the hospital where his son worked as a doctor. A young nurse, pregnant and in her wedding dress, facing the ultimate betrayal at the altar by a millionaire groom. 25 years of secrets, sacrifices, and silent struggles. A mother's unwavering love, a son's innocent dreams, and a shocking twist of fate that brings past and present crashing together in the most unexpected way. Sometimes life's cruelest moments lead to the most powerful revelations, and redemption comes from the most unlikely places. This is more than a story about betrayal. It's a testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength of a mother's love, and the true meaning of the American dream. Get ready for a journey that will make you believe in second chances, the power of resilience, and most importantly, that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch. The luxurious St. Patrick's Cathedral in Chicago fell silent as Sarah Mitchell collapsed at the altar, her white wedding dress spreading around her like a broken dream. The prestigious guests from the Harrison family whispered and pointed, their judgment echoing through the sacred halls. Just 30 minutes earlier, Sarah had been the happiest bride in Chicago. At 23, the dedicated nurse was about to marry William Harrison III, heir to one of America's largest construction empires. Her small-town parents couldn't attend. Her father had passed away years ago, and her mother Rose was too ill to travel from Milwaukee. But Sarah didn't mind. She had William, their baby on the way, and a promise of a beautiful future. That future shattered when William's lawyer walked down the aisle instead of the groom. "Miss Mitchell," he announced, his voice cold and professional, holding up an envelope. "Mr. Harrison sends his regrets in this letter." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it, her 4-month pregnant belly betraying her condition to those who didn't know. "Dear Sarah, the Harrison name has been built over generations. My father made it clear, marrying someone of your social standing would destroy our reputation, especially now. I'm sure you understand, it's just business. William." As she looked up from the letter, Sarah caught snippets of conversations from the Harrison family members. Well, what did she expect? A nurse? Marrying a Harrison? And pregnant already. How convenient. Through her tears, Sarah saw Elizabeth Harrison, William's mother, approaching with her designer purse clutched tightly. The elegant woman pulled out a checkbook. "Dear, let's handle this quietly," Elizabeth whispered, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Name your price. We can make this situation disappear." Sarah's world spun. The cathedral's grand ceiling began to blur. The last thing she heard before fainting was someone saying William had been spotted at O'Hare Airport with Victoria Sinclair, the famous socialite from Boston. She woke up in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where she used to work until last week. She had quit her job, ready to move to New York with William. Now doctors hovered over her with concerned faces. "Ms. Mitchell, you need to stay calm," the ER doctor urged. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. This is a high-risk pregnancy now." From her hospital bed, Sarah could see the evening news on the TV in the doctor's lounge. There was William, boarding a private jet with Victoria, both laughing as cameras flashed. The Harrison Industries logo gleamed on the plane's tail. A nurse Sarah used to work with brought her phone, 3 missed calls from the Harrison family lawyer. A text message popped up. "The Harrison family is prepared to handle this generously, provided you sign an NDA and leave Chicago immediately. Otherwise, we'll be forced to protect our clients' interests through other means." Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling her baby move. In just 1 hour, she had lost her fiancé, her job, her dreams, and her dignity. But she still had someone to fight for. "We'll be okay, little one," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mommy promises we'll be okay." Outside her hospital room, she could hear the nurses gossiping about the scandal. The perfect Harrison heir, leaving his pregnant nurse fiancé at the altar. It was already becoming Chicago's favorite society scandal. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of her mother Rose back in Milwaukee. She had warned her about fairy tales not coming true. Now Sarah would have to return home, not as a successful nurse who married into one of America's wealthiest families, but as another cautionary tale about dreaming too big. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. At least she wasn't completely alone. Sarah's return to Milwaukee was harder than she imagined. The local newspaper had already picked up the story. Local nurse left at altar by Chicago millionaire. Her mother Rose waited at the bus station, arms open and tears in her eyes. "I mortgaged the house," Rose said as they drove home. "It's not much, but it'll help until you get back on your feet." "Mom, you shouldn't have done that," Sarah protested, but Rose just squeezed her hand. The harassment from the Harrisons started the next day. Their lawyers called constantly, offering money in exchange for her silence about the pregnancy. Each offer was higher than the last. "Miss Mitchell," the lawyer said during one call, "the Harrisons are prepared to be very generous. However, if you choose to make this public, we'll be forced to question the paternity. Think about your reputation." Sarah hung up, her hands shaking. The threats were getting worse, but she wouldn't give in. This baby was all she had left. Finding work proved nearly impossible. Milwaukee wasn't Chicago, and word had spread fast. 3 hospitals rejected her application. The 4th interview at St. Mary's Hospital started like the others. "Your qualifications are impressive," the nursing director said, "but we're concerned about your situation. A single mother might not be reliable for night shifts." Sarah felt her heart sink. She needed this job. Her savings were almost gone, and Rose's mortgage payments would start soon. "I'll take any shift," Sarah pleaded. "I've never missed a day of work in my life. Please, just give me a chance." The director studied her for a long moment. "We have an opening in the night shift. It's hard to fill because nobody wants it. You'll start next week." That Sunday, Sarah went to church with Rose. She felt the stares and heard the whispers. But Father Michael's sermon was about forgiveness and new beginnings. After the service, he approached them. "Now the community stands with you, Sarah," he said. "Don't let anyone shame you for choosing life." His words gave her strength, but the reality of working nights while pregnant was brutal. During her first shift, the exhaustion hit hard. At 3 a.m., while checking patient charts, everything went black. She woke up in the emergency room, her colleagues hovering over her. "Your blood pressure dropped," the doctor explained. "You need rest. This job and the pregnancy, it's too much." "I can't rest," Sarah said, sitting up despite the dizziness. "I have bills to pay." That's when Margaret, the head nurse, stepped forward. "We'll adjust your schedule." The other nurses agreed to swap some shifts. "We take care of our own." The kindness of her coworkers contrasted sharply with another letter that arrived from the Harrisons' lawyer the next day. This one was more direct. If Sarah didn't accept their offer and sign an NDA, they would make sure no hospital in Wisconsin would hire her. "They can't do this," Rose said, reading the letter. "They're the Harrisons, Mom. They can do whatever they want." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The baby was active, kicking as if sensing her distress. She thought about William, probably in some luxury hotel with Victoria, while she worried about making ends meet. But as she looked around her childhood room, now filled with secondhand baby items donated by church members, Sarah felt something stronger than fear or despair. She had her mother's love, her faith, and a community that supported her. The Harrisons could keep their money and their threats. "We're going to prove them wrong," she whispered to her unborn child. "You and me, we're going to make it." The next morning, Sarah returned to work with her head held high. The Harrisons might have taken her dreams of a fairy tale life in Chicago, but they couldn't take her dignity or her determination to give her baby a good life. Milwaukee wasn't Chicago, and night shifts weren't glamorous. But Sarah was home, and sometimes she was learning that's where the real miracles happen. The pregnancy complications started during Sarah's 4th month. The doctor's words hit her like a truck. "Your blood pressure is too high. Without bed rest, you could lose the baby." Bed rest meant no work. No work meant no money. "I'll help with the bills," Rose promised. But Sarah saw her mother wincing when she thought no one was looking. The breast lump Rose discovered while showering worried them both, but she refused to see a doctor, claiming they couldn't afford 2 medical issues at once. The community stepped up in ways Sarah never expected. Meals appeared on their doorstep. Church members took turns driving her to prenatal appointments. Her coworkers from St. Mary's donated their sick days. At 7 months, Sarah's water broke during a routine checkup. "The baby's coming too early," the doctor announced, rushing her to delivery. "Now, we need to do an emergency C-section." The hours that followed were a blur of fear and pain. Sarah kept asking for her mother, but Rose had gone for tests of her own, finally agreeing to a mammogram after weeks of Sarah's pleading. Michael William Mitchell came into the world fighting. "He's small but strong," the nurses said. Sarah counted his fingers and toes, noting how his nose matched William's baby pictures she'd seen in old newspapers. What she didn't know was that Elizabeth Harrison stood outside the nursery that night, watching her grandson through the glass. A nurse later told Sarah about the elegant woman who stared at Michael for hours before leaving without a word. When Michael was 3 days old, still in the NICU, Rose received her test results: stage 3 breast cancer. The next few months tested Sarah's limits. She split her time between caring for a premature baby and taking Rose to chemotherapy appointments. Michael proved to be a fighter, growing stronger each day despite his early arrival. By the time Michael was 3 months old, he was hitting all his milestones. His smile lit up the entire pediatric floor when Sarah had to bring him to work. The nurses nicknamed him Little Doctor because he never cried during checkups. "He has the Harrison chin," Rose observed one evening, then quickly added, "But your heart, thank God." Sarah saw it too, the subtle reminders of William and Michael's features. But where those similarities once brought pain, now they meant little compared to Michael's gentle spirit and bright curiosity. The hospital staff fell in love with him. During Sarah's shifts, they took turns watching him in the break room. He charmed everyone, from grumpy patients to tired doctors. One day, while Sarah was changing Michael in the nursery, a nurse rushed in. "There's a woman in the lobby asking about your son. She says she's his grandmother." Sarah's heart stopped. Through the nursery window, she saw Elizabeth Harrison standing at the reception desk. "Tell her we're not here," Sarah said, holding Michael closer. Elizabeth left without incident, but she'd written something on a piece of paper. "He deserves his inheritance. Please call me." Sarah tore up the note. The Harrisons had made their choice months ago. She wouldn't let them hurt Michael like they'd hurt her. That night, watching Michael sleep in his secondhand crib, Sarah made a promise. "You'll never feel unwanted or not good enough. You're perfect just as you are." Rose, weak from her latest round of chemo, stood in the doorway. "You're giving him something the Harrisons never could. Unconditional love." Michael grew quickly, showing an early fascination with Rose's medical equipment. He'd watch intently during her home nurse visits, offering his stuffed bear for pretend checkups. "That boy's going to be a doctor," the home nurse predicted, watching 3-year-old Michael listening to his bear's heartbeat with a toy stethoscope. Sarah just smiled. Her son would be whatever he wanted to be, without the burden of the Harrison name or expectations. He had something better, the love of a family that chose him and a community that protected him as their own. The future was uncertain, with Rose's health declining and bills mounting, but Michael's laugh made everything bearable. In his eyes, Sarah saw hope, not for the life she'd almost had in Chicago, but for something more authentic and precious. Rose's cancer spread faster than anyone expected. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she was determined to see Michael's 4th birthday. "I'm not going anywhere until he blows out those candles," she insisted, even as the pain medications increased. Sarah nearly lost her job trying to balance work and caring for both her mother and son. Her supervisor called her in after she was late for the 3rd time that week. "Sarah, I understand your situation, but we have policies." "Please," Sarah begged. "This job is all we have. Mom's medical bills." The supervisor sighed. "One more chance. That's all I can give you." Michael spent his afternoons in Rose's room playing doctor with his toy medical kit. He'd check her temperature and give her pretend medicines, making her laugh despite the pain. "You're going to be the best doctor ever, sweetheart," Rose would tell him. One rainy Tuesday, Rose asked to speak with Sarah alone. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were clear. "Sarah, I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Mom." "Let Michael chase his dreams, no matter the cost." "And," Rose hesitated, "find Elizabeth Harrison." Sarah stiffened. "Mom, the Harrisons—" "Elizabeth comes to the hospital," Rose interrupted. "She watches Michael when you bring him to work. She's not like the others." "How do you know this?" "Because she's been helping." "Who did you think paid for my last round of treatments?" Sarah sat down hard. "Oh, what?" "She came to see me 2 months ago. She's been carrying the guilt of what William did. She wants to make it right." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed time to heal." Rose took Sarah's hand. "Which brings me to my second promise. You need to forgive them." "Mom, I can't." "Hatred will destroy you, Sarah. Not them, you." Rose's grip tightened. "Promise me you'll try. Not for them, but for yourself, for Michael." Sarah looked at her mother, remembering all the times Rose's wisdom had proven right. "I promise," she whispered. "Good," Rose smiled. "Now get that boy in here. Grandma needs her medicine." That night, Rose slipped into a coma. She passed away 3 days later, holding Sarah's hand. Michael, too young to fully understand, kept asking when Grandma would wake up. The night after the funeral, he placed his toy stethoscope on her empty bed. To help Grandma feel better in heaven, he explained. The funeral brought the entire hospital staff and church community together. They filled the small church, sharing stories about Rose's kindness and strength. Sarah noticed a figure at the back of the church during the service. Elizabeth Harrison, wearing a simple black dress, trying to blend in. She left before Sarah could approach her. Later, the church members revealed how Rose had touched their lives. She'd been secretly baking for the homeless shelter, visiting shut-ins, and counseling young mothers, all while fighting cancer. "Your mother had more grace in her little finger than most people have in their whole body," Father Michael said during the eulogy. "She taught us that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in how many lives you touch." That evening, going through Rose's things, Sarah found a letter addressed to Michael to be opened on his 18th birthday. She also found a note for herself. Dearest Sarah, remember what I taught you. Family isn't about blood or names, it's about love. Elizabeth understands this now. Give her a chance, not for the Harrisons, but for Michael. Some bridges are worth rebuilding. All my love, Mom. Sarah sat on her mother's bed holding the note, remembering Rose's last request about forgiveness. It seemed impossible, but she'd promised. Michael crawled into her lap, holding his bear. Mommy, is Grandma an angel now? Sarah hugged him close. Yes, baby, and she'll always watch over us. That night, Sarah made another promise. To honor her mother's legacy by raising Michael with the same grace and wisdom Rose had shown. The path ahead would be harder without her, but Rose had taught her well. The hardest part would be keeping that promise about Elizabeth Harrison. But Rose had never steered her wrong before. 6 years after Rose's death, 10-year-old Michael burst into the hospital break room where Sarah was finishing her shift. Mom, I got an A+ on my science project. Mrs. Peterson says I should be a doctor. Sarah hugged him, remembering Rose's words about supporting his dreams. But medical school seemed like an impossible mountain. Their savings account barely covered next month's rent. Working 3 jobs was killing her. Hospital shifts, weekend waitressing, and cleaning. Offices at night? She barely saw Michael, except during her breaks when he did homework in the break room. Miss Mitchell? A hospital administrator appeared at the door. You have a visitor in the lobby? Sarah found Elizabeth Harrison waiting, looking out of place in the county hospital. Before you ask me to leave, Elizabeth said quickly, please read this. She handed Sarah a bank statement. An account had been opened in Michael's name, with monthly deposits starting the day Rose died. Rose made me promise to look after him, Elizabeth explained. William doesn't know. Why are you doing this? Because I failed as a mother. I let William become someone who could abandon his child. Elizabeth's voice cracked. I can't change that, but I can help Michael have the future he deserves. Before Sarah could respond, Michael ran up. Elizabeth froze, seeing her grandson up close for the first time. Mom, can we get pizza? I got an A+. Sure, honey, go get your backpack. Sarah turned to Elizabeth. I need time to think about this. Elizabeth nodded, watching Michael leave. He looks just like William at that age, except his smile, that's all you. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Rose's words echoed in her mind. Some bridges are worth rebuilding. The next week brought another surprise. The Harrisons' lawyer called, but not with threats. The family would like to establish a trust fund for Michael's education. Sarah almost hung up, but remembered the college brochures Michael had been collecting. No strings attached? None. The money goes directly to any university he chooses. What Sarah didn't know was that William had started losing the family fortune. His gambling debts were mounting, and rumors of fraud circulated in Chicago's business circles. Elizabeth visited again, this time with old photo albums. Michael should know his medical history, she explained. The Harrison men have a history of heart problems. Over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Elizabeth shared the truth about the past decade. How she'd been secretly tracking Michael's progress. How she'd helped Rose with medical bills. How William was spiraling downward. He's not the son I raised, Elizabeth admitted. But Michael, he's everything we hoped William would be. Sarah thought of Rose's final request. You can visit him, but no mention of William or the Harrisons. He's Michael Mitchell, and that's all he needs to know. Elizabeth agreed. She started volunteering at the hospital, finding subtle ways to be part of Michael's life. He knew her only as Mrs. Beth, a kind volunteer who always had time to listen to him practice his science presentations. The other nurses noticed Michael's growing interest in medicine. They started a small fund collecting spare change for his future medical school. That boy's special, they'd say. He's got healing in his hands. Sarah watched her son thrive, unaware of the complex web of secrets surrounding him. The monthly deposits continued, building a future fund that might actually make his dreams possible. One day, Michael announced, when I'm a doctor, I'm going to help people who can't afford care, like Grandma Rose. Sarah hugged him tight, thinking of all the people secretly helping to make his dream come true. The hospital staff, the church community, and yes, even Elizabeth Harrison. Rose had been right. Family wasn't about blood or names. It was about love in all its complicated forms. The Milwaukee Journal's headline caught everyone's attention. Local student becomes youngest accepted to state medical school. Michael's photo smiled from the front page, his acceptance at age 18 making local history. In Chicago, William Harrison III stared at the same article in his office, now a shadow of its former glory. Harrison Industries was crumbling under federal investigation for fraud. His gambling debts had spiraled out of control. "He looks exactly like you," his secretary remarked, not knowing the connection. William had been secretly following Michael's achievements since discovering his existence 5 years ago. He'd attended Michael's high school graduation, standing in the back, leaving before anyone noticed. Sarah found the graduation video someone had taken. In one frame, barely visible, a man watched from the shadows. She recognized William immediately, despite the years. "Mrs. Beth," Michael said one day at the hospital, "would you help me practice my medical school interviews?" Elizabeth, still known only as a hospital volunteer, beamed at her grandson. "Of course, dear." Sarah watched their interaction from the nurse's station, seeing how Elizabeth treasured these moments with Michael. But the peace wouldn't last. The news of Harrison Industries' collapse hit Milwaukee. Michael was studying in the break room when the story aired. Harrison Empire Falls CEO William Harrison III faces federal charges. Sarah held her breath, but Michael barely glanced up from his books. To him, the Harrisons were just another wealthy family in trouble. Elizabeth arrived at the hospital in tears. "And William's lost everything. He's gambling away what's left. I had to secure Michael's fund before..." She couldn't finish. The next week, a young reporter started asking questions at the hospital. Someone had tipped him off about Michael's connection to the Harrisons. "There's a story here," he told Sarah. "And the public would love it. Abandoned son succeeds while father falls." "Print that story," Sarah warned, "and I'll sue you for harassment." The reporter left, but Sarah knew they were running out of time. Michael's resemblance to William was too strong to ignore. Elizabeth helped manage the situation, using her remaining connections to kill the story. But rumors started circulating in the hospital. "Have you seen the Harrison scandal photos?" one nurse whispered. "That CEO looks just like Michael." Sarah found Michael studying old medical journals late one night. "Mom, did you know the Harrisons funded this hospital's first cardiac unit? There's a whole article about William Harrison III's grandfather being a pioneer in medical philanthropy." Her heart stopped. "Medicine has an interesting history," she managed to say. The next day, a letter arrived from Chicago. William had written, clearly drunk, talking about making things right. Sarah burned it without reading past the first line. But that evening, Elizabeth revealed the truth about William's spiral. He's been following Michael's achievements for years. Has a whole file of newspaper clippings. The guilt is destroying him. "Good," Sarah said, but remembered Rose's words about forgiveness. Michael continued excelling, unaware of the drama surrounding him. He won a prestigious first-year medical scholarship, making the news again. This time, William showed up at the hospital, drunk and disheveled. Security removed him before he could reach the ward, where Michael worked as a volunteer. Sarah confronted Elizabeth. "Keep him away from my son." "He's lost everything, Sarah. The company, his reputation, his family. He gave up his family 18 years ago," Sarah snapped. "Michael is my son." That night, Sarah found an old photo of William in one of Michael's medical journals, a story about Harrison Industries' healthcare contributions. The resemblance was undeniable. Time was running out. Soon, someone would connect the dots. Sarah had to decide, tell Michael the truth herself or risk him discovering it from strangers. But watching him study, full of dreams and innocence, she couldn't bring herself to shatter his world. Not yet. Not like this. Sarah's night shift at St. Mary's started like any other, until the emergency room doors burst open at 2 a.m. A male, mid-50s, possible heart attack, the paramedic announced, found unconscious outside the hospital. Sarah froze when she saw the patient's face. William. Harrison III lay on the stretcher, unshaven and wearing ragged clothes. "Dr. Mitchell to ER stat," the speaker crackled. Sarah's heart stopped. Michael was on call tonight. She watched as her son rushed to treat the father he'd never met. William was barely conscious, clutching his chest. "Sir, I'm Dr. Mitchell. Can you tell me what happened?" William's eyes flickered, focusing on Michael's face. His own face from 30 years ago. Then he passed out. "Get me an EKG," Michael ordered, not recognizing the man who'd abandoned him before birth. Sarah stood paralyzed, watching her son save his father's life. After stabilizing William, Michael started his examination. "Nurse Mitchell, I need the patient's belongings for ID." Sarah's hands shook as she opened the plastic bag. Inside, she found a worn wallet. As she handed it to Michael, several old newspaper clippings fell out. Every article was about Michael. His high school graduation, his medical school acceptance, his scholarships. Some clippings dated back to his elementary school science fairs. Michael picked them up, confused. "Why does a homeless man have articles about me?" Before Sarah could respond, Elizabeth Harrison rushed in. She'd been called as William's emergency contact. "Sarah," she gasped, seeing her there. "Does Michael—" "Not now," Sarah warned. But Michael was already examining the clippings more closely. "Mom, what's going on?" "Dr. Mitchell," another nurse called. Patients regaining consciousness. William opened his eyes, looking straight at Michael. "My son," he whispered. "My boy." Michael stepped back. "There must be a mistake." "Mom?" Sarah felt the weight of 25 years of secrets crushing her. "Michael, we need to talk." "No," Michael said, backing away. He can't be." Elizabeth stepped forward. "Michael, I'm not just Mrs. Beth. I'm your grandmother." The truth crashed down in the worst possible way. Michael looked at his mother, hurt and confusion in his eyes. "All these years?" His voice cracked. "Everyone knew except me?" He turned and walked out of the ER, leaving Sarah standing between her son and his father. One she'd protected for 25 years, the other she'd hidden from for just as long. William tried to get up. "Please, let me explain." "You've done enough," Sarah said firmly. "Stay away from him." But as she turned to follow Michael, she saw what else had fallen from William's wallet. A baby picture of Michael, worn and creased from years of handling. Elizabeth picked it up. "He's carried this since the day I told him about Michael's medical school acceptance. He's been watching over him in his own way." "Watching isn't parenting," Sarah snapped. "No," William said weakly from the bed. "I don't deserve him. I just needed to see him become everything I failed to be." Sarah found Michael in the chapel, where she'd spent so many nights after Rose died. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not looking at her. "To protect you. He abandoned us at our worst moment. You deserved better than that pain." "Did Grandma Rose know?" "She taught me to forgive him. I'm still trying to learn how." Michael stood, his white coat a stark contrast to the dark chapel. "I need time, Mom, to process this." Sarah watched him walk away, seeing both the baby she'd protected and the man he'd become. The truth was out, messy and painful, just like the night that started it all. In the ER, William Harrison, former millionaire, now homeless, lay connected to monitors, watching the door his son had walked through, finally understanding everything he'd thrown away 25 years ago. As William recovered, he started volunteering in the hospital's geriatric ward. Gone were the designer suits and arrogance. Now he pushed wheelchairs and read to patients who couldn't see. "Why is he still here?" Michael asked Sarah one morning, watching William help an elderly man with his breakfast. "The rehabilitation program requires community service," Sarah explained. What she didn't say was that William had completed his required hours weeks ago. The elderly patients loved him. They didn't know he was once William Harrison III. To them, he was just Bill, the volunteer who always had time to listen. Michael kept his distance, but Sarah noticed him watching, especially when William worked with veteran patients, showing a gentleness no one expected. The Harrison family wasn't finished, though. They sent their lawyer with a new threat. "Either Michael claims his place in the family," he told Sarah, "or we'll reveal everything, including some details about your past you might want to keep buried." Sarah stood her ground. "There's nothing in my past I'm ashamed of." Elizabeth confronted her own family. "Leave them alone. Haven't we caused enough damage?" But the Harrisons had found Michael's weakness, his dream of a free clinic for the elderly. They offered to fund it, with conditions. "All you have to do," they said, "is come back to Chicago as a Harrison." William overheard their offer while mopping the hall. He stepped in, facing his family for the first time since his fall. "Michael," he said, "they'll own you, like they owned me." The Harrisons turned on him. "You're nothing now. You can't even afford a place to sleep." "But I can sleep at night," William replied. Michael witnessed the exchange, seeing both sides of his heritage clearly. The power and prestige of the Harrisons against the hard-won wisdom of the father he never knew. That evening, William collapsed while helping a patient. Michael found him clutching his chest. "Your heart can't handle this work," Michael said, reviewing the tests. "Some things are worth the risk." Sarah watched their interaction, doctor and patient, son and father, seeing glimpses of connection neither would admit. Elizabeth made her choice. She publicly denounced the Harrison family's tactics and transferred her entire fortune to Michael's future clinic. "I choose my grandson," she announced, "and his mother, who taught him what real strength is." The Harrisons retaliated by leaking William's story to the press. News vans appeared at St. Mary's. Local hospital drama, homeless father and doctor son. William offered to leave. "I'm causing problems again." But Michael surprised everyone. "You're my patient. You stay." Sarah found them later, William teaching Michael how to play chess in the geriatric day room. Not talking much, just moving pieces in comfortable silence. "He's not doing it for show," Elizabeth told Sarah. "He's really changed." Sarah remembered Rose's words about forgiveness. Watching William with the elderly patients, She saw what her mother meant. Real redemption wasn't about grand gestures, but small acts of kindness, day after day. The Harrisons made one last attempt. They offered William a chance to return to Chicago, to a comfortable life, if he'd convince Michael to join the family. His answer was simple. My son's already part of a better family. That night, Sarah found Michael updating William's chart. His heart's getting weaker, Michael said, but he won't stop volunteering. Some battles choose us, Sarah replied, thinking of her own journey. William continued his work in the geriatric ward, knowing each day could be his last. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from anything. They'd all found their places, not in the grand Harrison legacy, but in the quiet halls of St. Mary's, where healing meant more than just medicine. The Chicago Tribune reporter arrived unannounced at St. Mary's. Lisa Chen had built her career exposing corporate scandals, and the Harrison story was too good to ignore. Dr. Mitchell, she cornered Michael between rounds. The public deserves to know how the Harrisons treated you and your mother. Michael kept walking. No comment, but Lisa was persistent. She'd uncovered details even Sarah had forgotten. Your mother almost died that day at the altar, she told Sarah. That the medical records show critical blood pressure levels. They knew you were high risk. They didn't care. Sarah felt old wounds reopening. That's in the past. The Harrisons are still hurting people, Lisa pressed. Their medical insurance company just denied coverage to hundreds of elderly patients. Your story could stop them. Michael found Sarah in the break room, holding Lisa's business card. Maybe she's right, Mom. Maybe people should know. Before Sarah could respond, Elizabeth burst in. The board is meeting in Chicago. They're voting to close all their charitable medical programs. William, listening from the doorway, spoke up. They're punishing us, closing the programs to hurt Michael's clinic. The situation worsened when an old Harrison family friend recognized Michael during rounds. Oh, you look just like your father did in medical school, he said loudly, before the Harrisons forced him to quit and join the business. Michael looked at William. You were in medical school? William nodded. First year. Top of my class. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was a coward. I let them convince me that money mattered more than helping people. The revelation changed something in Michael. He called Lisa Chen. I'll talk, but not about me. About what the Harrisons are doing to their medical programs. Sarah supported his decision, but worried about the consequences. The Harrisons still had power. The story exploded. Harrison Healthcare Scandal. Profit over patients. Michael's interview focused on the denied coverage, the closing clinics. He never mentioned his personal connection. The Harrisons retaliated immediately. They announced plans to demolish St. Mary's, which they partially owned, to build luxury condos. William knew what he had to do. He called a press conference, his first public appearance since his downfall. I'm William Harrison III, he announced to the cameras, and I'm dying. My last act will be to expose what my family has done. He revealed decades of medical insurance fraud, backed by documents he'd kept as insurance. Elizabeth joined him, adding her own evidence. Mother and son, once Milwaukee's most powerful family, now stood together against their legacy. The Harrisons tried to silence them with threats and bribes. William refused millions to retract his statements. I've already missed my son's whole life for Harrison money, he told them. Never again. Michael watched the coverage with Sarah in the break room. He's giving up everything, Michael said. He already lost everything, Sarah corrected. Now he's choosing what matters. That night, William had another heart episode. As Michael treated him, their barriers finally broke. I'm proud of you, son, William whispered. You became what I was too weak to be. Michael squeezed his hand. It's not too late to be more. Sarah watched them from the doorway, remembering Rose's words about forgiveness. Sometimes it came in unexpected ways. Lisa Chen's final article told the whole story, not just the scandal, but the redemption. How a homeless volunteer and a dedicated doctor exposed corruption and saved a community hospital. The Harrisons made one last attempt to salvage their reputation. They offered to spare St. Mary's if Michael would publicly deny the story. His answer was simple. I'm a Mitchell. We don't lie for money. In the geriatric ward, William continued his volunteer work, weaker but more determined. He'd found his own way to heal, not through medicine, but through service. The truth was finally out, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't a story of revenge, but of redemption. The Milwaukee Medical Association's annual ceremony packed St. Mary's Auditorium. Michael hadn't wanted to attend, but Sarah insisted. His Doctor of the Year nomination couldn't be ignored. "You earned this," she told him, straightening his tie. The nomination highlighted his work with elderly patients and his role in exposing healthcare fraud. No mention of the Harrison connection, exactly how Michael wanted it. Elizabeth sat with Sarah, both watching William slip quietly into the back row. His heart condition had worsened, but he wouldn't miss this. The hospital administrator took the stage. Our nominee dedicated his life to serving those others forgot. He turned down lucrative private practices to stay where he was needed most. Michael shifted uncomfortably as they listed his achievements: launching free clinics, exposing insurance fraud, working extra shifts to cover patients who couldn't pay. But what truly sets Dr. Mitchell apart, the administrator continued, is his belief that every patient deserves dignity, regardless of their circumstances. In the back, William wiped his eyes. The administrator was describing everything he should have been, everything his son had become without him. Michael approached the podium to accept the award. The speech he'd prepared suddenly felt wrong. "When I was 3, he began instead, "I used to play doctor in my grandmother's room while she fought cancer. She told me medicine wasn't about making money, but about making a difference." Sarah caught her breath, remembering Rose's final days. "I grew up watching my mother work night shifts, never complaining, always finding ways to help one more patient. She taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts." Elizabeth squeezed Sarah's hand. "Recently, I learned about choices, how some people choose power over purpose, and others choose service over status. I've seen both paths clearly." William lowered his head, feeling the weight of those words. This award belongs to the real heroes, the nurses who work extra shifts, the volunteers who give their time, the community that supports us. They show us that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about mercy. The audience stood, applauding, but Michael wasn't finished. "And sometimes it's about forgiveness, about learning that it's never too late to choose a better path." In the back row, William struggled to breathe, overwhelmed by his son's words. After the ceremony, patients lined up to congratulate Michael. Among them was Old Joe, a homeless veteran William had befriended. "Doc Mitchell's got healing hands," Joe said loudly, "just like Bill who helps us old folks." Michael looked at his father, seeing him through his patient's eyes, not as the fallen millionaire, but as someone who'd found his own way to heal. Sarah watched her son navigate the crowd, proud of the man he'd become. She thought of Rose, of all the sacrifices, of the long journey from that church in Chicago to this moment. Elizabeth made her way to William. "Our grandson," she said simply. "No," William corrected. "Sarah's son. She did this. All of it." The local news covered the ceremony, but not for the Harrison connection. They focused on Michael's work, his free clinics, his advocacy for elderly patients. "Dr. Mitchell represents the best of Milwaukee," the reporter concluded. "A hometown hero who chose to give back." Later, in the quiet hospital chapel, Michael found Sarah. "Mom, about what I said." "Rose would be proud," she answered. "So am I." Outside, William watched through the chapel window, seeing his son and the woman he'd wronged finding peace in their own way. He'd lost his chance at a family 25 years ago, but somehow, they'd all found something better: truth. The award would sit in Michael's office, not as a symbol of personal achievement, but as a reminder that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes in medicine, sometimes in mercy, and sometimes in the quiet courage to forgive. The opening of the Rose Mitchell wing at St. Mary's drew hundreds of community members. The free clinic for elderly patients stood as a testament to everything Rose had believed in. "My grandmother taught us that true wealth lies in serving others," Michael addressed the crowd. "This clinic will never turn away a patient for lack of money." Sarah cut the ribbon, remembering Rose's tiny apartment where it all began. The clinic's waiting room already held dozens of elderly patients, many of whom William had helped as a volunteer. William sat quietly in his wheelchair, weaker now, but still determined to serve. He'd refused the Harrison family's final offer to return to Chicago for treatment. "My place is here," he told them, "helping where I can." Elizabeth had kept her promise, funding the clinic through her personal fortune. The Harrison name appeared nowhere on the building. "It's the Mitchell wing," she'd insisted, "a name for the woman who taught us all what family really means." The first patient through the doors was Old Joe, the homeless veteran. Michael treated him while Sarah handled the intake forms. William sat with Joe afterward, playing chess like they did every Tuesday. Local businesses had joined the cause. The pharmacy provided discounted medications. Restaurants delivered meals for patients who couldn't cook. The community Rose had loved stepped up to honor her memory. During the tour, Michael showed visitors the wall of photos. Rose's journey from waitress to community mother, Sarah's years of nursing, the countless lives they'd touched. This is the real American dream, a reporter noted. Not making millions, but making a difference. William watched his son work, seeing the doctor he should have been. His heart condition was worsening, but he found peace in small acts of service, reading to patients, helping with paperwork, being useful. Sarah discovered him one evening, teaching a young volunteer how to comfort anxious patients. "You learn," she said simply. "It's not too late for us," he replied. But maybe not too late to help others. The clinic quickly became known for its compassionate care. Michael implemented policies learned from his years watching Sarah. No rushing patients, no dismissing concerns, treating everyone with dignity. Elizabeth volunteered at the front desk, happy to be known simply as Mrs. Beth again. Her Harrison jewels had been sold to fund medical equipment, a trade she'd never regret. 1 year after opening, the clinic had served over 1,000 elderly patients. Michael's methods gained national attention, proving that quality care could be provided without massive profits. The day the clinic treated its 1,000th patient, Sarah found a note in Rose's old Bible. "Love proves itself through service. Money can't buy dignity, but kindness can restore it." William's health declined rapidly that winter. He refused transfer to Chicago's prestigious hospitals, choosing to be treated where he'd found redemption. Michael cared for him professionally, but with growing understanding. They'd never have a conventional father-son relationship, but they'd found their own way to heal. The clinic's success inspired other hospitals to open similar facilities. The Mitchell model, they called it, putting patients before profits, community before costs. Sarah sometimes stood in the clinic's entrance, watching her son treat patients with the same gentle spirit Rose had shown her customers at the diner. William helping elderly veterans navigate paperwork, Elizabeth comforting worried families. They'd all found their place, not in the grand Harrison legacy, but in the quiet work of helping others. Rose would have understood. True wealth wasn't built in boardrooms, but in moments of kindness, one patient at a time. The American dream hadn't died that day in Chicago's cathedral. It had just taken a different shape, proving that success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched and hearts healed. In the end, they'd all learned Rose's greatest lesson. Family isn't about blood or names or fortunes. It's about choosing love every day in all its forms. The Rose Mitchell Wing stood as proof that sometimes life's hardest moments lead to its greatest purpose. And that's a legacy worth building. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about forgiveness, redemption, and the true meaning of family. And remember, sometimes our greatest heartbreaks lead us to our most beautiful destinies.